right. Yeah. So, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Rebecca Bailey, who is going to talk to us about the Vermillion, South Dakota Shakespeare Festival.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to, whoa, no, not wrong click. This click. Wonderful. Hello, everybody. I know, I like conversation, right? Thank you so much for having me back here again this year to visit with you about what has been going on for South Dakota Shakespeare Festival, about the incredible performances and workshops and all of the things. Did I turn this on? Am I on? Okay, great. Did the wonderful performances, workshops, and things that are happening in the community this year. And most importantly, some thank yous and conversations about the work that you as Rotary, that you as a community have done to make this a reality this year. So, seeing if this works, South Dakota Shakespeare Festival became a to be or not to be conversation, right? I am so sorry. Rich, can you, or not Rich, Greg, can someone hand me my phone? I had something I wanted to share off of it, and then I usually don't bring my phone with me up for these. That became a large part of the conversation this year. Thank you. Where would I be without Greg Huckabee? Lost is the answer, along with a few other folks sitting out here. But that became a reality with the loss of the South Dakota Humanities Council and some of the other grants and types of funding that existed. So I want to share with you something that just came up in the past week, and just so that we understand what could have been this year. This came from the Michigan Shakespeare Festival. At the moment, we are considering if there is a future for the festival. Over the last 30 years, it has grown from the typical festival in a park to a professional union house with Broadway talent. With that growth has come increased costs that have proven as unsustainable. Our greatest regrets are for our artists, who were expecting both employment and creative outlet this summer, and for our audiences, who were expecting another stellar season of great Shakespeare. It is impossible not to feel we've let them, you, down. Yet we will try to remember that it is the impermanence that makes theater unique. While other art forms are captured, live performance simply is. And then it is not. It vanishes into the air and exists only in memory. It is the ephemeral nature of the art that makes it beautiful. So we are sad, yet we know we did all we could, and there are others this summer who will be doing great work, conspiring with audiences to bring these plays to life. And South Dakota Shakespeare Festival is one of those that is carrying on. But that really was a question. They had to let their actors know 2 days before actors were scheduled to arrive into town that they were not going to be able to complete their season. And so for folks who make a living and for our reputation, I am so grateful to this town, to this community for stepping up, that we were able to continue those contracts that we had made, and that we are able to continue this great work. South Dakota Shakespeare Festival, just so we remember and so that I continue to share, just like you all start off with the questions at the beginning of this, are we meeting this? This is our mission, and everything I ask when we put forward a season, when I bring these ideas and this excitement to you, goes back to this mission. And it has been our mission since the inception and the creation of this. South Dakota Shakespeare Festival is to engage, connect, and inspire communities by exploring our shared human experience through inclusive professional Shakespeare productions and theater arts education. We are about access. We are about professional, artistic integrity, right, and excellence, right, accessibility. That's why it streams, that people who can't come to us, but even more importantly, people who can't come to us, like the Juvenile Detention Center. This year we are increasing, we will be there 4 times over the next 5 weeks with programming. So I bring back to you, I do want to say this. We stay true to our mission. We've stayed true to our values. And most importantly, what we remember, this is last year, and you can't quite see the rainbow very well with the light here, but this was during Merchant of Venice last year. And we stay close to our home. It's the roots of what we have sown in this community, of what you all sow, and what you continue to plant, that allow this. We are branching out into further parts of South Dakota. Our ability to reach new audiences and different demographics and folks across the state is growing. And yet we are also, the Shakespeare Festival is what exists here in Vermillion, and that hasn't changed, doesn't change. Our actors come and they are living here. We were at CC's, they were downtown at Tuesday Trivia, and they become a part of your community in this incredible cultural exchange that happens as we give them, or as they give us what their talents are, their gifts, their experiences, and we give back to them our talents, our culture, who we are. And when they go back to everywhere from the Philippines to New York to San Jose, I think but California, we have somebody from LA, right? When they go back, Boston, Virginia, and they talk about here, that award about the small town arts, they go back and they say, oh my goodness, right? And they talk about it and they share. And all I have heard since they walked in the door is how welcoming and opening this community has been, their host families have been. So there are a number of those folks sitting out here too who have opened their homes and invited them into their homes, right? So our home is an important part of this. This is this year's company, so we have Romeo and Juliet. We have our lovely cast. There are far more people. There are a couple of the company members involved in there, and there are a number of people who are nowhere pictured because they weren't here the other day just for that photo. Right, but this is the season that you often see. But just like I mentioned, the Juvenile Detention Center, that we're there 4 times, that we are working with Upward Bound, we do 2 to 3 days of programming with them. And I ask the question all the time, and this is conversation, right? What do you think when I say we are going to teach programming to this group for a certain period of time, or what we're doing? What do you think we teach? I'm just curious. What is it you think we go and do? What is it we think we do?
Costume making.
Costume making. So maybe we talk about how do we build some of the costumes or the pieces or what goes into that. Great. Sometimes that would happen.
My kids participated. So
We've done that a lot. We talk about a lot of why we choose what costumes too and what goes into that. What else?
How about sound and lighting?
Okay. We have, interestingly enough, because there's a lot of sound issues, music in a park, there's a lot of sound. Lighting, we don't have as much because we're outdoor, but yes, those things can be. What else? Anybody else? Application of performance? Yes, and I want to even say it differently. Much of what I do has to do with actually how we relate to each other. What is it about a shared human experience that connects us? How do we recognize empathy? How do we recognize what it is to walk in someone else's shoes, to understand what that means? And in a world where divisiveness and the things that tear us apart can be easier to see than the things that bring us together, theater reminds folks, A, how to use that this is a safe place, and helps me to go back and find confidence in who I am, safety and confidence. It also teaches me how to work with other people, whether it's healthy boundaries, how to work together and have to make compromises and struggle to put something together that amounts to it, and it then gives me positive reinforcement when people applaud, when people recognize it. I spent a couple of weeks ago Zooming into the International Trauma Conference in Boston. And theater is one of the #1 ways that they are talking about in building resilience, healing, coming together with positive relationships again after I've lost the confidence to have those. My friends, when I go to the juvenile detention center, I would love if they got bit by the theater bug. Nothing would make me happier as the theater kid, the person who didn't have a place to fit in, and I found all of that for me in theater. And that's a repeated story with so many of the folks that are on that picture, right? But if they actually walk away recognizing that they're different experiences, having walked a mile in someone else's shoes, if they think about, I didn't like what they did, but I have to make a choice at how to work together because we have to get to this other end goal, and people are counting on me. If they start to make those connections, that's the success. That's what I'm there teaching. Confidence, communication, being able to own a narrative about themselves to decide how I want to be seen, and finding a way to voice it. These are the wins. I do teach acting. I do teach costume design. I do teach how to tell story. But a lot of what we are teaching is actually relating in human beings and understanding these stories are about how someone else felt and what happened. 2 houses, both alike in dignity this summer, right? And yet we see the ending of this play. You watch a play knowing the ending of this play, right? So we all know where it's headed. But if these students can make different decisions and they can recognize what was lost by the Montagues and the Capulets, and they make a decision to do something different, and they talk about it in their lives, what would Romeo and Juliet look like for them? That's the win. That's what I go out and teach. And yes, along the way, if I have someone who wants to be an actor, sign me up. Let's have that class too. I'll talk about how to break down a monologue. I'll talk about going into a Shakespeare audition and how to use the language and all of those pieces. But it's not just for someone who wants to be an actor. It's for human beings to remember what it is to walk this journey, to walk this path, and that you and you and you and you, we're all walking with a lot of wants and needs and feelings, and if I don't look at what it might be, I'm missing a whole big part of the picture, because it's about connection, right? So there we go. This year, like I said, we are expanding. This is us last year here, which is where we will have our South Dakota Shakespeare Festival, the 18th through the 21st. Nope, sorry, 26th through 29th. I went that direction. Should have done it the other way. Prentice Park. We will also have Shakespeare Trivia Night. We will also have Bark with the Bard. Bring your dog. We're going to walk our happy 5K on the set. You can get pictures, right? Because we want to involve the community. There's a community conversation, but we will also be exploring on the Sylvan Green outdoors in Brookings, South Dakota. They will be having their first performance of live theater in that space, and they are welcoming us as a part of their season. And it means that more people across the state see what you sponsored here, what started here with you, and what you all have brought to life. So thank you, thanks, and more thanks. That is the website. It is beautifully updated with our new updated logo that gets us. I did get a lot of questions at one point. You can't see the red one very well because I used a red background, but there are 3 flags. That's how they used to tell if it was a comedy tragedy, right? We have replaced the windmill with the pole that was up over the globe that said, there's theater happening today, and then it told you what you were going to see. So that is sort of the history of how that became, even though it's morphed over the years. Does anybody have any questions that I can answer? Yes.
Does the festival have enough money to, this year, or do you still need donations?
Beautiful. And in addition, volunteers are also welcome. We will turn down no help. Whether it is financial, whether it is time, everybody has gifts to give. But on that financial question, so thanks to the city who voted to meet, and it closed out the budget, which means we were able to bring actors here and know that I can pay their contracts. What that does not mean is that if that festival closes and none of that changes, we do not have the money to actually start through the following year existing as a corporation. So unlike Michigan, our Michigan Shakespeare Festival, unlike that, hold on, we can pay the contracts for our actors this year. I knew when I brought them in that we may not be able to pay everything exactly the way we would have liked or do everything the way we would have liked, but I will be able to pay actors who are here. And that was our first and foremost concern. But the reality is, and that's why I started in their note, I don't know about the future, right? They shut their doors for this year and they're not sure they will reopen. I don't know, without us looking at how this changes, especially if we do not have grants that come in and help the arts exist. I do not know what the future will be as far as how we reopen next year without continuing to talk about donations and help and sponsorship for this company. So the fight isn't over. Thank you, Betty. It's very much not over. And yet I am quite believing that we aren't going anywhere, because I'm not doing it without a fight, and neither is this town and this community from what I've seen. So, any other questions? Thank you, Betty. I will. Really, that applause goes both ways. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. It really is a community event. Our scout troop is going to be providing some security. And starting next week, I'm going to start passing around sign-up sheets. Rotarians always provide traffic control for this festival, so we'll be looking for everyone to sign up for that. All right, so now I have the pleasure of introducing Representative Dusty Johnson, who's going to give us a short update and then take questions from all of our Rotarians and their guests. Mike Card is going to help moderate that. We have 2 microphones up here. And welcome, Dusty.
Well, maybe I'll only set the stage for 4 or 5 minutes, so we've got plenty of time for questions. And I'm not really going to kick it off by talking about public affairs at all. I would observe that from a societal perspective, there isn't anything wrong with America that more Rotary couldn't solve. That is maybe hyperbole, but only just barely. I suspect many of you know that in 1995, Robert Putnam wrote an essay called Bowling Alone. It later became a pretty popular book in 2000, where he lamented the decline of social capital in this country. And in the 1970s, more than 2/3 of Americans regularly attended club meetings every week, and by 1995, fewer than 1/3 did. And of course, it's gotten a lot worse for a long time, until the nature of my work meant that I couldn't be in Mitchell on Thursdays. And just over the 15 years that I was a Mitchell Rotarian, I saw the decline in our attendance. Some Rotary clubs, some Kiwanis clubs, some exchange clubs do better than others, of course. But we do know that increasingly Americans, they don't belong to bowling leagues. More Americans are bowling in any given year than ever before, but they are bowling alone. And it shouldn't be lost on any of us that here in this room, we have senior leaders from the South Dakota Democratic Party and senior leaders from the Clay County Republican Party. Rotary clubs are still rooms where you can get a broad cross-section of philosophical, political, and societal views. And those places, we don't have enough of them. And that, like the Capulets and the Montagues, it means we more and more view one another as the enemy. And that has absolutely poisoned the nature of our public discourse in Washington. Not to attack any particular primary voter in the room, but I think we all acknowledge that all other things being created equal, the angriest candidate is more likely to win a primary across the country. And indeed, even in this very, very smart room, some of you a little smarter than others, but if I was gonna, if maybe I got to strike 3 of you, the rest of you, as smart as you are, could not together name 20 members of the 435-member U.S. House. Of course, you'd get Marjorie Taylor Greene, and of course, you'd get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You might get Lauren Boebert. You might get Matt Gaetz, who's no longer a member, thank God. But I would just submit to you that the 10 members you know are not very representative of the 425 you don't know. But that a lot of incentives in the system reward bad behavior. They push us further apart. And so I would just close by thanking you for, I mean, this is a good club. This is a great attendance. And it's one of the few places in America right now at this moment that people are getting together, not motivated by their own tribal interests, but by something bigger than themselves, by something like the 4-way test. So thanks for having me.
All right. Well, this tees up my question perfectly. So first of all, Carrie Oyen, I'm the program director of the school psychology program, and I've spent a lot of time going up to DC to do advocacy. First of all, I want to give a shout out. I saw that your son is doing a job. My daughter just got her first job at the Subway. She's a sandwich artist at the Coffee Cup. So if you are on your way out and you stop there and you see her, I'm quite proud of her for getting her first job. One of the things that I have been struck by, I'm not lost on the fact that we don't get to see all the hardworking people up in Washington. One of the things I've been very impressed by with you is your participation and leadership in the Problem Solvers Caucus. And so I know in particular you and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick have worked very hard to think about ways that we can align and ways that we can try to solve some very real problems that exist for us. I just don't think that they make the news very well. One of the things I'm most proud of is the school mental health demonstration grants that have been in existence across the nation. We are a very proud recipient here at the University of South Dakota. I should say that I'm representing myself here. But one of the things that I've been most proud of is that we've been able to home grow school psychologists in our state and across these rural areas where we need them the most. What I'm wondering about is, as you're looking to continue to build that kind of work, what do you think are the biggest priorities for the problem-solving caucus, within the next year, as you're looking at kind of reaching across the aisle and really making a difference for places like small-town South Dakota that's trying to make a difference in mental health?
Yeah, and first off, not to bum you out, but I would observe that even just in the 6 years I've been around, I have seen how much less fertile the ground is for bipartisanship. And there are lots of reasons for that, but COVID was really, really bad for bipartisanship. Republicans had the sense that at the national level, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle locked things up for way too long. Obviously, January 6th, the Democrats were big mad at Republicans, and again, these are all valid sources of anger. Reconciliation always causes a serious hangover. I think there was a sense with both the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan that our friends, our Democratic friends in the Problem Solvers Caucus had betrayed us. I have no doubt that my Democratic friends feel the same about the Republican problem solvers in the wake of One Big Beautiful Bill. And so it is a much more difficult time to try to find common ground. Now here's the crazy thing. I don't care how partisan you are. Don't you have to acknowledge the fact that it is literally impossible for something to become the law of the land outside of reconciliation, which is a once-a-year mechanism? It's literally impossible to become a law without votes on both sides of the aisle. So anyone who would ever say that I would never work with that other party is giving up. They have decided that they refuse to be a part of governing of this country. Now, maybe someday we'll get rid of the filibuster. I hope we don't. In general, Republicans have had more fealty to maintaining the filibuster. And it seems as though John Thune is going to maintain the filibuster. But again, that reinforces you cannot have funding for school psychologists or anything else if you cannot find votes on the other side of the aisle. For fertile ground, to actually get to the point of your question, I think siting and permitting, we have a uniquely American-sized problem. The same road project that you can get done in 2 years in Italy and France takes you 7 years here. The same energy project you can get done in 2 years in Canada or Australia takes you 7 years here. No other country struggles as much to build projects as our country does, which is amazing. Because if you wanted to assert that the history of America is the history of big ideas, big investments, and big projects, I think you'd probably have a pretty good thesis there. Do any of us really think we could get the Tennessee Valley Authority project, or the Missouri River dams, or the Eisenhower Interstate System, or rural electrification, or universal service done today in the same way that we got them done in a remarkably narrow period of time between the 1930s and about the 1960s? I don't know that you could get the interstate highway system done today. And I think that's too bad. And, the Democrats come to the party with an interest in renewables. The Republicans come to the party with an interest in more industrial development and pipelines, although maybe not in this corner of the state quite so much, but more broadly across the country. And so there is a ripe moment for us to say, wait a second, why are we worse at this than literally every other country on the planet? And I think we're going to get something done. Are there any other questions from anybody other than Betty before we go here?
I'll be kind.
Oh, no, she's just a brilliant, the saddest thing about having professors move on, we should probably enslave them in the classroom, the really good ones, but it's just, she's probably been replaced by people just as capable, but it's hard to imagine.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
I'm not saying that about my card, by the way, just let me be clear.
Or Julia Hellweg, who was my replacement, who's fantastic. So my question is really about separation of powers, right? And my biggest concern about what's going on right now is that the president is not following Congress's budget. The courts have issued hundreds of decisions saying, no, you have to do what Congress says you have to do. You've got to follow the Constitution. So there's over 200 cases now in which the courts have found the administration at fault, and yet in the big, beautiful budget bill, there's a little clause that kind of says, well, courts are really limited in what they can do about what federal agencies do, and so it's really weakening considerably the already very, very weak powers of our judicial system. And so, we've got the budget issues which affect us in this town dramatically. I can tell you my son lost his USAID job in the middle of working with international internet providers to create access to medical care in rural clinics in Africa. So a lot's changing, and it's changing very, very, very quickly. But my biggest concern is retaining the power of Congress to tell the president enough's enough, to draw the line. When is Congress, or where do you see the line?
Yeah, and number one, I think it's a super important question. I would observe that it is, if Congress, to your point, Betty, we've appropriated the dollars. They're not spending them. Now, this is a 250-year-old debate about the presidential power of impoundment. We could again pass, as I imagine we will in a few months, an appropriations package that largely funds those same things at about the same levels. Us continuing to pile laws on top of laws doesn't compel the White House to do anything. That really is for the courts. And with one exception, which, and I think a lot of Republicans have made it clear to the White House that a red line would be a systematic refusal to listen to a court order. Now, the most concerning issue to date, I think, for most Republicans in the House and the Senate who brought up that issue is the deportation of the gentleman, and the White House had the claim that because the airplane was already in international waters or airspace that the court no longer had jurisdiction. I don't know how much I buy that legal rationale, but it is a plausible legal rationale. right? We have not yet had the White House just summarily refuse to obey court orders that they disagree with. And in fact, they have complied with many court orders that they vehemently have disagreed with. And so I do think, and I'm sure not all of you are big fans of Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, but I would say the current configuration of the court, I think, shares many of your concerns. And I think the checks and balances is a three-branch calculation, and I think you're going to see. Plenty of pushback from the courts. Now, that being said, the Trump White House is probably batting about 50-50. I don't know. There have been hundreds of court cases. They have won a fair number, even up to the Supreme Court. It is okay for us to talk about judicial reform, by the way. The idea that it's somehow an erosion of norms to not allow a single circuit court judge to, or district court judge, rather, to issue a nationwide injunction. I mean, that's just, we didn't have nationwide injunctions for 220 years. And so the Republican proposal is to go back, in essence, to the system that we had until about the 1980s, whereby you needed a three-judge panel before you could have a person impose temporary law across the whole country. That actually seems to me to be probably a safer place for us to be rather than a short-term rule by one person in a robe. So some of these reforms, I think, will put us in a better spot.
Right now, the uncertainty of every day that policy changes or tariff changes or something different, one or the other policy. So where do you see in a timeline that when will we have the stable, organized thinking that we can think with we know that what's going to come in next year, 1 year, 2 years time, and how do we strategize as average citizen? And with all these things going on, how do you put yourself, you being in a very challenging position out there, and with your kind of ideology, how do you position yourself dealing with current issues?
Well, first I would, number one, thanks for the question, Rakesh. And I don't, listen, nobody's going to cry for the congressman, right? I mean, we can say that my job is challenging, but I think we all acknowledge that for somebody who just got laid off from USAID or someone who is still in the process of trying to get here legally but now feels in limbo because maybe their temporary legal status is in the process of getting revoked. I mean, these disruptions do have a real human impact, and certainly far greater on many than on members of Congress. We are going to be, listen, Donald Trump wants to disrupt the system. There is not going to become a point where he just says, okay, I've got everything just the way I want it. It's smooth sailing now, gang. And I think we have to observe, even if you would do things differently or if I would do things differently, that the November election turned in no small part on the idea of him as a disruptor in chief. Now, I have certainly communicated a number of times publicly and more privately when I think either Elon or Doge or the White House has missed the center point of the target. From the National Weather Service to Lewis and Clark to the humanities funding. I mean, I think there have been some times that we are not hitting the center of the target. And I think there's not going to become a time where everything's going to be smooth. This is going to continue. I think he believes that in every agency there is still a lot of really necessary reform that needs to be done. Now, when you all discover a particular reform idea that you think is problematic, you just got to let Sydney or Caleb on our official team know, because we communicate with the White House on a daily basis about areas where we think those reform efforts could be improved.
Hi, Dusty. I'm Kelsey Collier-Wise. I'm the Executive Director of United Way and the Community Connection Center. A number of years ago, you came and toured the Connection Center, and we talked a lot, especially about feeding kids. And that's something that I'm really concerned about right now with the cuts we're looking at to SNAP. Our food pantry is completely community funded. We don't use government money except for a small one shelf of TFAP, which is actually helping our farmers, right, in our community food shelf. We cannot feed everyone in our community that's hungry. Vermillion has one of the highest poverty rates in South Dakota and one of the lowest unemployment rates. So these are people that are working really hard and cannot feed their families. If SNAP is cut, we do not have the capacity to make it up. If Medicaid is cut, we do not have the capacity to take care of these folks. When I talk to my colleagues around the state, we're very lucky here in Southeast South Dakota because we're a population center. We're close to grocery stores, we're close to hospitals that have the volume to be able to keep going. But so many of our rural hospitals, clinics, nursing homes are very Medicaid dependent. The grocery stores cannot continue if they don't have SNAP. So that creates food deserts. And so when I'm looking at this budget proposal, I don't know how you can square that with wanting to feed the people in this state. And how can we have workers and how can we have learners if they are hungry? And these folks are hungry. They are we're dealing with evictions at a higher rate at the same time that housing aid is being cut. The folks in our office that do housing aid have no idea from one day to another whether that funding exists. Like they are checking in day by day by day. It's truly a crisis that is right on the edge. And I feel like a lot of people are not going to see it until we have actual people sleeping on the streets. We do have people that are homeless, sleeping in their cars, sleeping in tents in this community, but it's going to come out in the open. And so I would just like to see our congresspeople standing up for the least of these in South Dakota, and I feel like they're being left behind.
Well, first off, let's be clear. Every single one of us should agree wholeheartedly with how you closed, which is we should care about the least of us. And a lot of these policy reforms, they have only become partisan in the last couple of years. Work requirements which were imposed on TANF and on food stamps, SNAP, in 1996 with an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote, and have been renewed for SNAP in every single subsequent farm bill on a overwhelmingly bipartisan vote. 150 some Democrats and 150 some Republicans. Like work requirements focused, and of course, listen, none of these work requirements that you're hearing about affect seniors. None of them affect people with young children at home. None of them affect pregnant women. None of them affect people with disabilities. None of them, like the work requirements today, they don't apply to anybody in any of the reservation counties in America. They don't apply to veterans, people within 5 years of foster homes. I mean, we absolutely want to make sure that these scarce resources are focused on the least among us. And so then we get to a question where, all right, if you're a 27-year-old without dependents who can work but chooses not to, what is society's obligation to you? I know what my obligation is to the 7-year-old. I know what my obligation is to the disabled, someone with disabilities, rather. I know what our obligation is to seniors. And I know we've got a lot of working poor, but that's what this is all about. If you are working and you still can't make ends meet, I want to walk with you. We have LIHEAP, we have TANF, we have Medicaid, we have SNAP. Like if you are the working poor, we should all feel compelled to help you close that gap. But if you can work but refuse to work, I hope you will forgive me if I believe that our societal obligation to you is different than that. And so there's been a lot of misinformation about these proposals. And so I want to make clear, again, none of these are designed to hurt any of the neediest among us. And to give one more example before we move on, and I know we've got a question up here, and then we can go back there. States are playing games, as I suppose some states are wont to do, but in South Dakota, very little will change because we have not played games with work requirements. California gerrymanders these SNAP districts so that, in essence, no one in California is subject to a work requirement. Most of the savings from cutting food stamps comes from making New York, California, Washington, and Oregon just play by the same rules we do. Maybe you view that as mean, maybe you view that as evil, but that was clearly congressional intent starting back to 1996 and in every 5-year farm bill since on an overwhelming bipartisan basis.
I did not know that there was. Oh, Jim Fowler retired from Lutheran ministry, but I keep pulling me back into things too. I did not know until President Trump took office that there was such a thing called an executive order. I have since learned that they've been around for a long time, but it did seem to me that it was a way to circumvent the legislative process. And I just want to know your observations on that.
Yeah, by the way, I'm going to quit sitting on this because apparently my 150 pounds of whoop ass is too much for that. But listen, we have built an imperial presidency. And I suspect many of you remember when Barack Obama stood at a podium and said, congressional Republicans will not act. I have this phone and I have this pen, so I will govern this country. That is a probably verbatim quote. I may have a syllable wrong, but I don't have 3 syllables wrong. And of course, under the Trump presidency, Trump won. We saw much the same approach. Joe Biden unilaterally, despite the Article 1 power of the purse given to Congress, wanted to spend $800 billion for giving student loans. Now, maybe you think that's a good policy decision. I think it's a terrible policy decision. If we were going to invest $800 billion in education, that is not where I would put it. If we were going to invest $800 billion in lowering the cost of higher education, that's not where I would put it, right? But policy decision aside, it was a novel constitutional take that one person could spend $800 billion. And of course, we've seen with Trump 2.0 a similar reliance on executive orders, and I've been consistent. I mean, I've talked about the dangers of an imperial presidency when my guy's been in the White House, and I've talked about the dangers of imperial presidency when the other party's guy is in the White House. And in fact, I have voted to oppose executive authorities by President Trump. And you know, it's interesting. I just when you're somebody who tries to play a little thoughtful, and sometimes you agree with President Trump, then you're like half of America thinks you're a fascist. When you sometimes disagree with President Trump, then people think you're like a squishy rhino. And again, nobody's going to cry for me. I would say I try to give my colleagues in the House a little bit of grace. And it seems like that is almost as much as anything, that's what our political discourse lacks these days. And so some of the executive orders for President Trump, I give him grace on, particularly if they are an attempt to roll back what I think was an executive overreach from the previous guy. Some of them are more concerning, and you and I would share an opinion on that.
Thank you. So I have two things. One is just a quick follow-up, a personal anecdote to share in response to your characterization of who would or wouldn't be affected by some of these changes and these work requirements. And so I thought about it a moment. I'll share with this room, I'm a current elected official. I have participated in South Dakota Medicaid and SNAP program. I have applied for both of those at times in my life, earlier in my life. They were a hand up for me, and they were incredibly useful, and I'm incredibly grateful to all the citizens of America that provided those to my family. They helped us get through some hard times, and it's wonderful. But that process was incredibly difficult. I'm a volunteer income tax preparer. That's way easier than successfully staying on Medicaid with my kids in this state. You're required to provide so much documentation. It takes hours of your time. The forms are filled with very threatening language about how many years you're going to go to prison if anything's inaccurate. And I contrast that with working at a credit union during the payroll protection program rollout, where we began writing loans that were forgivable to South Dakota farmers, where they got to take a $20,000 check after filling out a half-page application, simply signing on a dotted line that they were eligible for this, and then it was forgiven if they deposited it in a personal account, because then it was payroll, and it was keeping them employed. and then they were allowed to come back in and get another $20,000 check and walk away with $40,000 of taxpayer money in order to stay employed as a farmer in South Dakota. It didn't matter whether they didn't have to demonstrate their farm was impacted. And so I share that to characterize the different way that these programs, these giveaways, are applied in different areas. And so many of the people that would no longer receive Medicaid or SNAP will simply do so because they are working, and they're working 60 hours a week, and they don't have the time to do this paperwork. So if this is what we're doing, if this is the avenue we're going, we have to, just like we were talking about permitting reform and siting reform, it has to be coupled with serious ways of making it easier for the people that do deserve these. You and I agree about who should be getting these programs, who should be getting the service, but
Yeah,
making
because
sure that that's
I
there.
assume
So-
that when you were the recipient of the program, you were, and thanks for sharing the story again, because I think it humanizes this. I assume you were always open to being engaged in volunteer efforts, training efforts, educational efforts, or work efforts.
Yes,
There was never a time where you just said, nah, I don't even
Yep.
want to volunteer.
absolutely.
And when you're talking about people who are voting, I mean, again, the requirement, these draconian work or volunteer requirements are 20 hours a week. And so I know there are people who are working 60 hours a week. And again, I'll reiterate, I think we have a societal obligation to help walk with them. And I don't doubt for a minute that some of the requirements of these programs are overly cumbersome. And I think that is a fertile ground for bipartisan improvement. It's going to be a little hard game because the fraud has absolutely gotten out of control. Look at the food stamp, the SNAP error rate. In South Dakota, it's less than 5%. There are states where the error rate on SNAP is 60%. And in each of these programs, we have seen that the fraudsters, and frankly, in some states, irresponsible state governments, have caused for the integrity of these programs to be seriously wounded. And I think it's tragic because, again, it's the hardworking people who want to play by the rules who end up bearing the brunt of that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I did want to, my question also was, I do have a lot of concerns about the debt implications and deficit growing implications of the big, beautiful bill. And I'd like you to talk about what your thoughts are on that. I am worried that it's irresponsible to increase the debt that amount.
And
So-
this is probably it. I suspect I'm going to get the hook, but who's the boss on this? So I'll talk fast. But I'll be around a little bit afterwards. I'm not going to run off. The one big beautiful bill is under some legitimate economic analysis, fiscal analyses, close to deficit neutral, but that's not what the CBO says. Okay. Now it just depends on how much do you believe in dynamic scoring, the idea that some of these policies will create more economic activity and increased revenues. Now we really saw that in 2017 that there was a lot of dynamic scoring that should have been done that was not. But reasonable people can disagree. I would say, though, I'll acknowledge the basis of your question. I don't think this bill does enough on that front. I would like to see it be a far bigger force for reducing the deficit. Part of the issue is that it is really hard to cut anything, and part of the issue is it's really hard to increase taxes. If Republicans are not successful in getting reconciliation done, 80% of American families and 85% of South Dakota families will see a tax increase. That average tax increase will be 22%. That will, I think it's fair to say, create a recession that will plunge revenues and probably do more to imperil our welfare programs than not extending the tax cuts. Now, there's been lots of political allegations that these are like tax cuts for the rich. Let's just be clear. Overwhelmingly, the tax provisions of the reconciliation are only about extending the tax treatment we have today. Now, maybe you're a hard R, maybe you're a hard D. You got to acknowledge, though, that when Democrats had the House and the Senate and the White House, they didn't change these tax rates. They could have. They used reconciliation to do the IRA and the American Rescue Plan. If these tax rates were so advantageous to the rich and to the detriment of the poor, why didn't they change them? And it was because, on a bipartisan basis, we acknowledge that the tax rates we have in place today are pro-growth, and that a deviation from them would injure our economy. The only changes to that tax treatment, like tax on tips. The last I checked, Elon is not working for tips. No tax on overtime. If you're a bigwig, if you're a billionaire, you're salaried. You are not working hourly. So the deviations from the current tax regime are overwhelmingly about helping lower and middle income Americans and not the billionaires. And I think clearly both sides spin. There's lots of misrepresentation. But I think I think there are lots of legitimate issues about the reconciliation package. Some of you have brought up in very clinical, nuanced, and responsible ways. That has not been the nature of the debate on this bill in Washington. And I think some of the more hyperbolic debate has actually obscured our opportunity to have the real conversation about what is the deficit impact. So with that, I want to thank you all for your patience. And by the way, what a great story about the Shakespeare Festival. It's been years since I have come, and you have caused me to resolve to make sure that my 3 sons get down here this summer. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much. I promised Kelsey one piece of good news before we end today. So.
As you may know, my fellow Rotarians, Jeffrey and I are getting married this Saturday, and so I'll throw some money in the bucket for it, but also anybody who didn't get an invite, you should check in with me because it's going to be quite a party. So.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Representative Johnson. Great to see so many people here today. We hope some of you come back and join us again. We always end our meetings with a song, and Fowler is going to lead us.
Here we have 40 seconds.
My country is a sweet land.